Welcome to whoever's watching this video. Thank you for clicking on it. This video is a follow-up from Phineas Gage's video where I was talking about his injury to his frontal lobe due to the metal rod, and this will just be more of an insight into what the frontal lobe is actually about, more of an analytical video, since last video I only went slightly into depth regarding the frontal lobe and how his injury was more of it was a scientific breakthrough in terms of looking at this part of the brain. Nonetheless, let's go right into it. So as you know, it is, from the name you could probably tell, it's a lobe that is located at the front of the brain, frontal lobe, and it's right behind the forehead, and is consistent of many parts, and hence it is the largest of the four lobes, meaning that it's 1/3 approximately of the brain's volume. This means that it is larger than the temporal lobe. They come close in size. Both the temporal and the parietal lobe come close in size, and it's also larger than the occipital lobe, much larger than the occipital lobe at the back of the head, just above the cerebellum. But there's many key functions of the frontal lobe, hence it is split into parts. And so, of course, you can see from the image as planning, attention, decision making, and people with this part of the frontal lobe more developed would probably be more better at subjects like maths, for example, where you need to reason in order to get your answers correct. And people with more developed personality and emotions, like part of the brain, which I've mentioned on this bullet point here, would more likely be either more emotional, so they'd be worse at handling emotional situations, and so they would most likely not want to be a consultant for bad news. But someone with a less developed personality and emotions part of the frontal lobe, I'll mention the names later of the lobe, like the specific parts, but for now I'll just go off of the the descriptions. Well, as I was saying, personality and emotions, if it was less developed, then they would probably be better at breaking bad news, as they would be more hard-hearted, as you could say. Motor control, this is for movement, walking, running. More developed motor control would probably mean better hand-eye coordination for sports, maybe. And speech, so I've already kind of spoiled the name here. Broca's area, it is the pink area. It's right near smile. Well, this part wasn't really affected when, for example, when Phineas Gage was affected, as it doesn't, as his speech was not very affected. You could say his personality and emotions area and decision making was more distraught than the bottom two other descriptions. Nonetheless, diving into what actual parts of the brain exist and their functions, we'll go straight to the prefrontal cortex, so the most front part of the frontal cortex, if that makes sense. So this is the part that is like the first thing that touches the front of your skull after the blood-brain barrier, which I'll talk about in another video. Okay, so the prefrontal cortex. This is more, let's say, impulse control, planning, and social behavior, as I've mentioned here. This is what makes us different from other animals, as it's the most evolved part. It's the most evolved part of the brain in humans, which makes us obviously different from our most common ancestors, such as the chimpanzee. So that's the reason that humans are able to do more social activities instead of chimpanzees, as we are able to control our impulses more. We're able to plan better, and our social behavior would be more appropriate. Hence, damage to this prefrontal cortex would lead to more risky decision making and a lack of empathy. And you could say that actually Phineas Gage's prefrontal cortex was damaged, as his lack of empathy did come here, as people did say, well, from witness accounts, that he was a much more empathetic person before this injury happened to him. Hence, it wouldn't be a crazy assumption to think that his prefrontal cortex was damaged during the incident. Nonetheless, the motor cortex. This is more movement, so it's this is a complete opposite of what I was talking about in the last slide, where it is at the front, but this is at the back. This controls movements. For example, if I was to wave my hand right now, that would be the motor cortex doing that. And the weird image you see with a thumb kind of bending and all of that, that's a homunculus. So it basically shows that part of the brain, but with like each part, like for example, the hand is the largest thing there because that's the part that gets stimulated the most by the homunculus. So you could correlate that with anything. The tongue as well is moving a lot. It has to do a lot of stimulation, etc., etc. Stimulation will most likely come from a different part of the brain entirely, but the movement of the tongue would come from the homunculus, which we do a lot. We do a lot of movement of the tongue to talk, like I'm doing right now. Me talking right now is the homunculus acting just for the movement, not for anything else, not for, the actual sounds coming out. That would be a different part of the body. It's just the movement. And so it sends signals to like muscles from the brain. So you know how people say that they're not wrong. So the brain does send signals. More specifically, the motor cortex sends the signals all the way from my nervous system to my hand to move and do, a movement I would want to do. Then there's Broca's area. So from my last slide, let's link this to my last video. So his motor cortex was most likely not injured because he was able to walk himself to the doctors in order to get treatment. His prefrontal cortex was most likely injured. We're talking about Phineas Gage here, as his impulse control had worsened and his social behavior had become more unacceptable. Risky decisions he was making much more of, and he obviously had a lack of empathy. So, Broca's area. It was most likely slightly damaged, but he was still able to talk with a bit of slurring. So slurring meaning that some of the words he would say wouldn't be understandable, and this links to the damage. So Broca's aphasia. Aphasia just meaning damage. So they can understand speech, like Phineas Gage was able to, but he wouldn't be able to form fluent sentences all of the time. So it was most likely just a part of the Broca, which was injured. So this is more, for example, say if just the Broca's aphasia, just the Broca's area was damaged, this wouldn't theoretically be possible naturally in your daily life, as it is tucked away in the middle of the frontal lobe. It is in the left, but it's more unlikely. But say if it was, you'd have all your normal brain functions. You'd be able to, move normally. You'd have normal behavior management. It's just that you would have trouble speaking. You'd understand everything normally as well. Now, as a conclusion from all of this, I've talked about the Broca's area, the motor cortex, and the prefrontal cortex. What would happen if you actually damaged just the frontal lobe in general? Like the whole, let's make it more general now. Well, from Phineas Gage, what I've been talking about the entire time, he had just a personality change after the frontal lobe injury. More specifically, the personality change. This would mean that his prefrontal cortex was most likely the injured part of the frontal lobe. We know that his frontal lobe was injured, more specifically prefrontal lobe. Or you could get frontotemporal dementia, which is a loss of empathy and inappropriate social behavior. He may have had mild frontotemporal dementia, as he did have a lack of empathy after his injury from witness accounts I can see. And more extreme, you could have a stroke, or like paralysis, a stroke. So, for example, when you're having a stroke, some of the symptoms are your face is drooping. That would be because the motor cortex would not be sending the signals to that side of your face in order to make it act appropriately. And tumors, that would be expected for any part of the body being injured. And paralysis, as I said, because no signals would be getting sent for you to move. The reason people can hear when they're in paralysis is because that part of the brain would not be affected. It would just be the motor cortex. And then, nonetheless, thank you very much for watching. The citations and references to this video will be in the description. And if you did enjoy, please like and subscribe, of course. But if you would like to connect more specifically, please comment what you would like to see next in one of my videos. And even if you don't, there is a new video every Wednesday. So thank you for watching, have a good day, and we'll be exploring the brain one neuron at a time.